the next slide. There you go. All right. So I am not going to be able to see the questions until the end, but I'm going to keep going. Again, thank you so much for your patience. We are talking about M&A Negotiation Essentials. My name is Roxanne Reed. I'm a master negotiator trained through Harvard Business School online. And I do thank you. And we are going to be talking about creating value, claiming your fair share, and managing your emotions. So a little background, as you've all figured out, the boomer here. I do have over 38 years of business experience in finance, business management, marketing, consulting, obviously not in webinar presentations. I do have a Mastery of Negotiations. I have an M&A certificate through Columbia. And I'm going to make a note before I forget that going back to what Paul was saying, or sorry, Eric was saying, that if it's important, put it in writing. You're going to want what's important to be written in your contracts, because if things go south afterwards and it's not written down, a judge is going to sit there and say, if it was important, you would have written it down. That was one of my key takeaways from the Columbia Business School M&A program. I am a chartered life underwriter. I am a certified Main Street business broker, and I'm currently enrolled to be a certified business appraiser through the International Society of Business Appraisers. I run a boutique style valuation services for buy, sell transactions, growth and exiting. And I'm a finance broker for deals that are when you're looking for 100 million to 5 billion and up. Currently working on some projects this week that are 100 billion. I like to build trust with my clients through being authentic, which you've seen today, candor, I'll tell you straight up what I don't know, and humor, because, you know, we're human at the end of the day. Loving my life, I share with my husband, my golden doodle Ginger, where we live in Fredericton, which I mentioned, here in New Brunswick, Atlantic Canada. We also billet hockey players. I enjoy B-grade movies. Think Sharknado. I absolutely love, and Lavalantula, another all-time favorite. And occasionally we do get to see our two grown children. Our daughter's living in Ottawa, and our son moved this past summer out to Victoria, BC. So the next screen up, here are the world's best negotiators. That's your pets and your children. And going back to something that Eric said, is that business is personal. And that's why your pets and your children, and think about your pet does it without even saying one word to you, you know, whether it's English, Spanish, French, Italian, your dog's communicating to you. So let's just say that when we go into the negotiation world, are we better than what our dog is? I'd like to think we can be. All right. So what is the starting point for creating value? When we are going into negotiations, we are going to want to create value, and we're also going to, and this is the mutual part of things. So I will maybe step back to see what some of your answers are very, very quickly, but boys, I'm awful scared too. So let's just move on. I don't want to lose the momentum that I have. So what is the starting point for creating value? We create value in what's called the zone of possible agreement. I chose those colors because in the world of color, the color yellow added with blue will create the color green. And let's think that green is where we're going to make our money. You know, this is where the opportunity is going to happen. So the zone of possible agreement. Now, what is that zone of possible agreement going to look like when you go to enter into it? And we're going to talk about how to enter that zone of possibility and how to create value for your opportunity. So with that, a few of the things we need to keep a few things in mind when we go into the zone of opportunity. And I've asked the question, what are the few things that we can keep in mind? And when I come back to the screen, when I answer the questions, you know, we'll pick up on that there with your patients. So it's not likely to be a walk in the park. It's not going to be a walk in the garden. It is not going to be easy. So going back to the video, and if we have a little bit of time at the end, I'll go back and play that video for you, just because it really is humorous, and it does make a great point about you're not the only person at the table. And keep it in mind that the fact that it's personal, we are talking about people's lives. We're talking about your life if you're a buyer. We're talking about your money as a buyer. We're talking about your family as a buyer. And on the other side of the table, it's the same thing. We're talking about the seller's life. We're talking about the seller's family. We're talking about the seller's future. And each of you are bringing that into that place. So, it's not going to be a walk in the garden, but it doesn't have. It may even feel like you're lost in the forest at times. And Eric again was talking about deal fatigue. Deal fatigue is real, and the longer that a deal goes on, and the more complicated that it becomes, you're going to feel like, wait, what just happened? I loved this business, and now all of this is happening. So deal fatigue happens for both the buyer and the seller. So how do we go into that zone of possibility? You're going to go into that zone of possibility by being prepared. And before you even start negotiating, you need to identify what your BATNA is, your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. At what point do you walk away? What are the deal breakers? What is going to be your non-negotiable? So when we throw out a lot of terms and suggestions, recommendations, but we don't provide a lot of color around that. And that's what I'd like to do for you today, is provide a little bit more color. When we say prepare ahead, what does it mean to be prepared, to prepare ahead? Because, I talk to a lot of business sellers in particular, and they are looking to sell their businesses, and they're saying, well, I'm ready to sell my business. I'm in business. I'm ready to sell. All I got to do is, just hand the keys over. And when it comes to the buyer, we'll say, well, I'm ready. I've got money in the bank account, or, I've got people lined up who are going to support me. And it's that communication, that what does that look like to be prepared? I used to work with a couple of ladies, and their idea of a hot breakfast. And I remember one morning she came into work late, and she's like, she said, I was just so busy this morning. I took the time to make a hot breakfast for my daughter. And I'm standing back because, I'm a country girl. And in my mind, a hot breakfast is, bacon and eggs and home fries and some oatmeal and maybe some French toast to go with it. I mean, we're talking a hot meal. So I'm standing there, and I'm suitably impressed that she's made this hot meal. And I said, oh, what did you make? And she's like, instant oatmeal. I've never forgotten it, because in my mind, instant oatmeal is under a minute. It will take you almost as long to open up a carton of yogurt and eat it. So it really is about people's understandings and what have you. So go back to being prepared ahead. And a lot of these things go both ways, for the buyer and for the seller. So the financials, know the financials. As a seller, know your financials. Talk to your accountant. People are if your accountant's not already preparing you a cash flow statement, your buyer is going to want to know a cash flow statement. And as a buyer, you're going to want to know those financials. You are going to know what the EBITDA is. You are going to want to know what the STE is. And you want to know what the adjusted EBITDA is. You want to know what's been written down, what's been written off. and been added back and taken away. And you want to know all those ins and outs that have taken place. And I do want to mention somebody that I consider the queen of financial information. And again, she's on LinkedIn, and her name is Oana Labes, and we'll get it up there after, but OANA LABES. And today she posted 20 EBITDA adjustments. And just about a month ago, she posted, I don't know, like a dozen sneaky EBITDA adjustments. So, knowing what has taken place with those financials, the financials tell a story. And it's just a matter, do you know how to read that story? What's the break-even point? What are the sensitivities around interest, the position in the market, the competitors? Why is that seller selling? And why is that buyer buying? Coming back to the sensitivities, when I do my valuations, I provide sensitivities. So part of the information that gets shared is, okay, so for example, evaluation that I would have done back in this time last year when interest rates were low, the talk was that they were going to go higher. My report would show the numbers, so the SCE, the EBITDA, the equity values, all the different ratios that you want to know. And it's going to show it if the interest rate changes too. So if it was shown at 3%, what's going to happen at 4%? What's going to happen at 5%? What's going to happen at 6%? What's going to happen with these numbers when an interest rate sensitivity changes? So you're going to want to know that, and given what's happening this past year, it's a perfect example of how the cost of money has changed in financing. You do want to know about the competitors. You do want to know where they are positioned in the market. When we're talking, we'll definitely, even with the small businesses, it matters. But let's say we're getting up into those, $2 and $3 and $5 and $10 and $50 million businesses, and the revenues may be the same. And that's where, if all you're looking at are the numbers, that you may miss some. And again, I'll go back to Eric. Eric mentioned it, or no, it was yesterday, sorry, that the lady from the Netherlands mentioned it, that, what are you going to do if you buy and, all of the key people walk out the door? You don't have any security on that unless there are agreements in place and contracts in place that those key people have with their current employer. And again, about processes and what have you. We were my husband and I were watching a TV show the other night, and Nunzio would recognize this name, but there's an ice cream company called Chapman's, and they're one of the largest ice cream manufacturers here in Canada. And a few years ago, their plant burnt down, like literally totally wiped it out. And they didn't realize that they didn't have their recipes written down. But as it turned out, their key employees had been working there because it's a small town in Ontario. Their key employees had been working there for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. They knew those recipes off by heart. They met after the fire, they sat down, and they wrote the recipes out. But that company had been operating for 30, 40, 50 years without having their recipes written down. So when we're talking processes, these things matter, and if all of the information for the business sits in one person's head, and tomorrow that head is gone for whatever reason, and maybe permanently, maybe they've passed, where does that leave, the company that you're buying? And as a seller, where does that leave an opportunity for the next person to step in? Systems and processes. Okay. So again, going into the deal with, and this is more so on the buyer side, you're going to want to know what's called SWOT: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. You're going to want to know each of those categories pertaining to the financials, the people. We talked about key people. We'll talk about culture now, and we talked a little bit about the competition. So around culture, is this a team that pulls together? Is this a team that resists change? The people can really make it a good day or a bad day. It can make it fun, or it can make it not so much fun. And competition as well. Not just who is already in business against that company, but what's coming down the road with technology and innovations, and how are things going to change. We apparently, I didn't get to see it because here in Canada we don't get to see the same ads for the Super Bowl that you would see in the US. But apparently there was an ad for the one and only remaining Blockbuster. I didn't even know that it still existed, but there was one Blockbuster in America, and people go there for nostalgia. But when you think about Blockbuster as the history that they had, and now, if you had told me before, if we were having this event before the Super Bowl, I would have said there's no Blockbusters, but I was wrong. There's one Blockbuster. Same thing with, Kodiak film, film for cameras. It used to be, we took a picture and it was in a little cassette type of canister, and we had to send it away to be developed. Well, now look at what we have at our fingertips. And I've seen some amazing video even done on people's cell phones. So think about not just the competition that's here today, but what could be competition 3, 4, 5 years from now. So going into that place, going into your ZOPA zone, your zone of possible agreement, it's not meant to be a boxing match. It may end up where it feels like that, but it's not meant to be a boxing match. So when you go into it, be respectful. There's a person on the other side of the table. You want to be respected, and you want to show respect to the other person. And Eric, said, butter them up. Well, maybe that's what you need to do. But be genuine. Think ahead about, you like this business because you want to buy it. So what do you like about it? And that's something that you can agree on. You want to go into that with a starting on a place of agreement. So creating value is also known as an integrative negotiation style. It involves looking beyond the most obvious, because price is always at top of mind. But what other ways can we create value that can be brought to the table to expand that piece of the pie? So that zone, and if I was creative and capable, it would have been lovely to see that, that ZOPA might start out like this, but with negotiation, you can increase that zone and increase that zone and increase that zone to where you have more opportunities. And some of the things that you would think of is, having them stay to work for a year, or, earn-outs, and there's different ways to create value, and every deal is going to be unique. So in creating value, it's personal. Small talk matters. Keep track of the other person's arguments and interest, because as Eric mentioned, deals are going to fall apart primarily right at the front, as soon as you start digging in, or spectacularly in the lawyer's office. And it happens. As a matter of fact, it's what prompted me to want to be a better negotiator was I started 2 years ago, and I'm might be the oldest in the group today, but I'm the newest when it comes to this industry. But with that, I bring, all of my other history, my background. I was a small business owner a number of times. I closed a bookstore back in my early 20s, opened it and closed it. Started it with $5,000 on a loan, and drove to Winnipeg to a booksellers convention, and talking with the different people at the event, they looked at my husband and I like, aren't you special? And they took pity on us and sold us their displays like at 10 cents on the dollar. So we're driving home from Winnipeg with our car so full of books and displays and cassettes and teddy bears and gift items. And so I couldn't even adjust my seat, and we couldn't move, literally. But following that, I wanted to sell it, but I didn't start soon enough, and I was pregnant and having a difficult pregnancy, so the choice was just to close it down. But that entrepreneurial spirit doesn't leave. And a number of years later, once my youngest son started kindergarten, I bought a flower shop, and I owned and operated that for a number of years. When I bought it, it had already been in business for 45 years, and I sold it about 7 years later. So that was a really great experience, and I was able to sell it. I was able to pay off all my bills and essentially retire. So that's 20 years ago now. But I digress. Keep track of the other person's arguments and their interest. If it's going to fall apart, it's going to fall apart over things that were mentioned but weren't explored further, weren't explored deeper. It may almost sound like a casual remark, but it's not. Keep track of it. Make sure you've touched on it. Make sure you have a notation around it. Notes. You'll see that come up on another screen. So create a relationship before you even sign a deal. That comes right to the very first, where you're meeting them. And again, you heard Eric talk about where they were, the seller was showing the business. There is that meet and greet stage. Understand and respect each other's goals. Put mechanisms in place to foster communication. Don't leave everything to the lawyers. They're busy, they're tired, they're stressed. You're one of maybe 50 projects on their desk that week. Put mechanisms in place that if you needed to have a quick conversation over something, that you have that mechanism in place. Create a fair deal on both sides. When it comes to negotiation, there's some really great courses out there, some really great teachers. I happen to have the opportunity to do mine through Harvard. I would never have been able to do it if it hadn't been for COVID, because this was the first and only time that they had offered this program online, because otherwise I would have had to pay for the course. I would have had to pay to go to Boston, accommodations and food. And it would have been simply out of my wheelhouse at that time. Chris Voss is well known in the business, and he has courses, he has books. He's known for never split the difference. And coming back to create a fair deal on both sides and never split the difference. You might think that it feels fair on your side, but there have been studies after studies after studies that when you split the difference and you think it's equal, somebody always think about when you were a kid. Some families are worse than others. You got to divide the last piece of cake, or you're going to divide the last cookie, or the last drink in the fridge, and somebody's pouring it and you're right there and you're making sure that it's exactly the same. When somebody's going to say, you got, 1/10 of an ounce more than what I did. So yeah, identify what value is, because what you think is valuable for yourself may have no value whatsoever to the other person. That's an opportunity. We're going to get back to that in a second. Listen and watch for the feelings behind the words. It is emotional. Claiming value. Now, the other one is, giving some value. You're being gracious, you're being generous, and you're saying, but you're really giving things that aren't as valuable to you as an opportunity to see people reciprocate. And that's what you're looking for when you're creating value. Claiming value is pulling it this way. So it's called disruptive negotiation. And it involves trying to get just as much of the pre-existing value on that negotiation table for yourself and away from the other party. You're raking it your way. Eric alluded to it when he was talking about the rights and warranties. That's the place to really nail down what's going to happen if things don't go exactly to plan. Claiming value. You want to assess and improve your BATNA. And your BATNA is your best alternative. And ultimately, it might be that you're just walking away. You're going to calculate, but you don't reveal your BATNA. Like, you're not going to hand a sheet over to them and say, here's everything I want, and check it off. You're not going to do that. Calculate, but don't disclose your reservation point. We're going to get to that in the next screen on how to calculate a reservation point. Research the other party's BATNA and their reservation point. It's going to be a best guess, but coming to know what the value of the business is, knowing, and it's had an evaluation done on it, knowing what you're able to bring to the table. We'll get to that. Evaluate the ZOPA at both sides. So, we started with the point that here's the business. I want to sell it. You want to buy it. And we talk about a willing buyer and a willing seller. So have some sort of an idea of what the other person's goals are, what their values are. Notes. Keep track of the other person's interest, same as the last screen. Reservation point. This is really interesting. So I'm just keeping an eye on the clock here. It's the lowest value that you're going to put up with. And it's your walk away point. And that's for both sides of the table. So let's say you've got a $10 million, because I want to use easy round figures. So let's say we had a $10 million business, and knowing what's going on in the market, knowing what's going on with the competitors, knowing what's going on with the industry, knowing what's going on, maybe in a community or in a region, that you're not likely to get it, the whole 10 million. So what's the highest possible amount that you could possibly get? I use these round figures. This is just a sample. So maybe you can get 70% of that. So maybe you can get 7 million and not 10 million. So you're going to take that, turn that into a percentage. Then there's the lowest possible value. So maybe if this guy doesn't sell today at 10 million and the industry is in decline, but you still have opportunities and you know how to create value there, so it's still of interest to you, maybe he might only end up getting 3 million out of the 10 million. So you take those two high-low ranges, whatever they are, and I wanted to show extremes just so that you could see the math. Add them together and then subtract whatever the expenses are going to be. And Eric alluded to some of the expenses around, valuations, and maybe you want audited financials. That's going to cost you to have an audited financial. So add them together, take away the expenses. In this case, the reservation point becomes 7.4 million. So that you've got, in your back pocket, in your mind, it's there. And so if somebody comes in with, a $7.5 million offer on 10, it's getting closer to your reservation point. So you might, as a seller, want to create some value. You might want to, claim some value back. But that's how you calculate a reservation point. So quickly, because we are getting out of time here, manage your emotions, know your triggers, have an emergency plan, use an anchor, glass of water. I was nervous when we started, rightfully so. The technology got ahead of me, but I took a few drinks, It's only water. There's nothing else in it. But that can calm you down. And I did have that bottle of water on hand on purpose because I figured something would go wrong. Okay, give yourself a break. Maybe you need to step out of the room, do a reset, breathe, pause before responding. And you know what? Don't respond. Silence is powerful. Evaluate, know what your triggers is. Why are you feeling it? What are you feeling? And why are you feeling it? You know, at heart, we're still all kids in deep inside. You know, maybe you were teased when you were 10 years old. Maybe you were bullied throughout your life. You know, maybe you have a parent who was so negative, like you're not capable and you can't do that. And quite frankly, that was part of my upbringing. I was expected to stay within some really tight parameters. And my mother had her own reasons for doing that. And I totally respect that that was her life, but it wasn't my life. For example, my son, he's traveled around the world. I don't have that confidence. He's had 2 trips to Southeast Asia. He's lived for 2 or 3 months at a time in Hong Kong and Singapore and the Philippines and Malaysia and Bora Bora. And I don't have that confidence. And as a mother, it was terrifying for me to send him into some of those regions. And I threatened him. I said, do not get involved with any politics. You know, don't join any demonstrations. Like, don't do anything to draw attention to yourself, to get yourself arrested. Anyhow, plan ahead, know what you will do. That is going to help you just get through this part of it. So what percentage of deals fall apart? We've got 10, 25, 50, or 75%. Well, according to my experience in the industry, and according to Google and Investopedia, 50% of deals will fall apart. That's a high percentage. So if you can do a few things, learn a few things, have a few takeaways, so that your deal doesn't fall apart, then you're going to be well ahead of the average person. So keep in mind that once that contract is signed and the deal is done, that contract is put into a drawer. After that, what matters most is the relationship, and that is going to be ongoing. So that's why it's so important during the negotiation part of buying your business or selling your business that you don't burn bridges. Because according to certain brokerage houses, up to even 95% of small businesses are sold with some part of vendor financing, known as a vendor take-back. And I would think that the percentage would be as high yet again with the number of small business owners who are going to stay on and do some training and be there for coaching, be there as a mentor. And as Eric mentioned, you know, you want to put in the contract for even 365 days, whether you use it or not, you still want to have that in the contract as a backup. That's why you want to be respectful, and you do want to create value, and you don't want to be seen as the jerk at the table. And even if that means you're the only one at the table. So thank you for sharing your time with me today. The giveaway links are not in the chat, but we did get through it, and I'm hoping that this was taped and that you were able to see most of this. I hope you get to see all of it. So let's keep in touch. My name is Roxanne Reed. I'm directing you to my LinkedIn profile because that's where I spend most of my time. And please know that any referrals are richly rewarded. So if anybody has some deals that you want me to look at, I'd be happy to look at them and help where I can, because that's how we make money. We do it together. So I'm going to come back to the other screen, I think. Okay, so now I can see the questions. All right, so thumbs up if you actually saw the screens. All right. I'm just going to do some strolling here. I'm not sure where we were just all laughing at me or where there actually were questions in there. Okay. All right. Oh, thank you, everybody, for your patience. You guys really are the best. All right. Let's see. Somebody asked, why college if you went the entrepreneurial path? I'm not sure what that means, but I will tell you this, that I am an information junkie, and I just, quite frankly, I eat knowledge and information like it's candy. Some of my favorite websites, and I'm always got a course that I'm doing. There's always something that I'm learning. It's what I do. It's how I think. It's how my mind works. And Paul said that he would have thought 75% too. As far as some questions, and how do you manage timelines in a negotiation process? Well, that is an excellent question, and it is an important one. Sometimes the best way to manage that are to put deadlines in place. So, here's my offer, and this offer is going to be available for the next 30 days. And in the next 30 days, here are the things that I need to cover off due diligence. And I believe that we had a due diligence session yesterday. If anybody would like a sheet on due diligence, I'd be happy to provide you one. But yeah, oftentimes the best way, and as a seller, the best way to manage timelines is to be ready. And that's a whole other webinar on what it means to be ready as a business seller. But every time that somebody has to wait a day, a week, a month, 3 months for information, it starts to cool down real fast. All right. Can you share the reservation point formula again? Yes, I will do that. And let me just see. Here we go. That should be about right here. Sorry. Here. All right. So the reservation point is about, and these are guesses. They're all best guesses. What do they say about a deal? Well, nothing's known until it's done. So up until that point, everybody's providing their best guess. So possible. So look at those words: possible, highest possible value, lowest possible value. But you add them together. So if it's a 70% chance, you're going to add that 70, and then you're going to add 30, because 70 plus 30 makes 100, right? So there's 100%. So you're coming up with that 100% chance, but you're applying the math to it of the ask, and then you subtract the expenses cost to see that the deal is going to be done. Because the deal is going to cost the same as far as lawyer fees and as far as any accounting fees and evaluation fees. Those are going to cost the same whether you get the full value or you get the lowest possible value. So expenses are consistent, and that's life, isn't it? All right. Oh yeah, my bookstore. Oh my goodness, Paul. I was like 23, 24 years old when I started up that bookstore. My master's in negotiations. And Paul, that was 34, 35 years ago. The Harvard course was 2 years ago. So a lot of life stories in that time span. Maybe it's just a dash on my resume, but a lot of living took place in that time frame. Um, what are your thoughts about a 60-40 deal where the dealer sells 60 and retains the other 40, either in stock or as the seller's earn out? Yeah, it really comes down to the situation and what makes sense. And you know, let's just be honest that if a business can get their full value, they're going to get their full value. So typically those deals are only happening because the seller doesn't have another option. So as a business owner, it does put you at risk. There are things to do to mitigate that risk. As a buyer, one of the things that you can do to mitigate that risk. So somebody had asked, I think it was Eric, what do you do if you've written up the contract and then the guy shows up and he's just a jerk, he's storming around, and he's a big old grumpy bear, and he's undercutting your authority and undermining the changes that you're making to improve this situation. um, Make it part of the profitability, make it part of an earnout, so that it's in his best interest to make sure that you're successful and that you're hitting the targets that you've set for the business. Tie him into it, nail his feet to the floor a little bit, um, so that when he's out in public and maybe at the golf course, he's saying, "Oh my word, Paul is amazing. I couldn't be happier." I mean, I don't care what he says when he closes his bedroom door, but when he's in public, and if I was buying the business, then I am the goose that laid the golden egg. You better be treating me like this is the best thing that ever happened to you, right? So, and if it's important, put it in writing, get it in the contract. What's the best way to approach my employer about buying his business? Eric, that's such a wonderful, wonderful question. Um, you know, those situations really, for a lot of small businesses, that is one of the best situations. And it can be, it can be concerning. If, the relationship, and I don't know the relationship, but, if there's a good relationship, he might welcome it. If it's a bad relationship, you don't want it anyway. Um, I, I don't know what to really say because I don't know enough context to provide. But if you want to pick that conversation up after, Eric, and provide me more color, I'd be more than happy to offer an opinion. Who pays the transaction cost? Who pays the transaction cost? Well, typically both people pay their own. If I'm getting what you're asking, so it's not like buying a house where buy my house and you'll get a free car and a trip to the Bahamas with it. This is business. Everybody's going in there with their big boy pants on, and everybody's paying their own bills. Can you go into more detail about how to do the SWOT analysis? Yeah, that really is that's a standard. SWOT is a standard for every type of business, and you do want to identify the strengths, and the strengths of the business. It may not be the financials. The strengths of the business could be the people. They're the ones who, well, for example, when I mentioned the Chapman's ice cream, some of the best out there, by the way, huge fan. Their people saved their butts. They didn't have those recipes written down. And if it hadn't been for their long-term employees, they were going to be out of luck. And so, identifying the strengths, identifying the weaknesses. And Deb mentioned in her presentation that for a lot of us boomers, the weakness is the media and the technology, having written down processes, having systems in place. Accounting systems are a big one. Very, very, very few business owners understand their financials. So don't be surprised, if you're in there asking questions that, hey, it works. At the end of the day, I got money in my bank account. That's all I know. My accountant takes care of the rest. Don't be surprised that they can't answer those questions. Yeah, I love earnouts because it keeps skin. Yeah, that's exactly it, Paul. It keeps skin in the game. Yeah, the minus 500 on the slide, that was the cost of closing that deal on the 10 million, because $10 million deals aren't done for $1.50. Valuations can cost for larger deals even $150,000, and they run over an 18 months to 2-year period. Some of those really big deals, especially when they're selling public companies, those negotiations and those contracts and that initial start point, 2 and 3 years in the making. So on some of the really big deals, you can see expenses like that. All right. So yes, we got someone started in 5 minutes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, Paul, that's what I was saying. Yeah. Yeah. He's selling, everybody's paying their own expenses. So whoever asked for the help is paying for the help. All right. Thank you so much, guys. It's been a blast. I've enjoyed it, and I hope that you enjoyed it half as much as I did. Okay, we will leave you to your next amazing speaker, and I know I'm looking forward to it as well. Bye.